Welcome to another episode of Solitaryism, and I'm Robert Bitto, your host. The title of today's show is You're Too Young to Be So Isolated. Or I should say it this way, You're too young to be so isolated. And why do I say it like that? Because it was a phrase uttered to me or said to me in that very dramatic way when I was 27 years old. Well, what was happening then? A woman had called me, a friend of mine from college, and she was trying to catch up with me because I hadn't gone out for a couple weekends. And I had made mention to her that I had off from work on Friday, and I spent Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in what we would call in the 21st century monk mode. So I walled out the whole outside world and I concentrated on writing a fiction book that I finished, 28 years ago, something like that, and haven't gotten it published yet. I shopped it around at that time. It was the late 90s and publishing was a lot different than it is now. I mean, I could probably pull that book out and do some minor revisions and then submit it to KDP and get it published on Amazon like my other books that I've written. But anyway, back to Robert at age 27 and what brought on this comment from this woman. Because I was Mr. Club Boy, I was always out, I had multiple invitations on the weekends, I was Mr. Sociable and everything. I even had a phrase jokingly that whenever I got invited to some place and I already had plans, I'd say, I'm booked, so pretentious. And I was just Mr. Social Butterfly. I don't know if I would be that way now at that young age, because as I've talked about, and the whole reason behind this channel is to show that the world has changed. But anyway, back to the whole idea. You're too young to be so isolated. Well, I was spending all this time concentrating on writing. And, after that third weekend, with the 3-day weekend of just being holed up in my little apartment, typing away on my, I don't know what kind of computer I had then, but I did have a computer. My word processing package, WordPerfect 5.1 or something like that. But it was glorious. I was productive. I was doing stuff. Instead of hanging out at a bar, trying to meet people, just getting drunk, whatever. But this woman, her phrase has stuck with me for the entire rest of my life, which is more than half my life ago that she said this. But I wish, looking back, that I would have isolated myself a lot more. I would have been probably farther ahead in life had I been in permanent monk mode. And I would have avoided a lot of junk that, you might say that those were my formative years, and going out and getting sloshed with friends and doing all those things, that was a necessary part of my development. But even when I was back there doing it, back in the roaring 90s, when things were a lot different, I knew I was wasting my time. I knew I was wasting my money, even though draft beers were $1.50 or whatever the heck it was. And the cover charge was $3. I knew I was wasting my time. I knew I was wasting my money. And if I have a regret about those times, is that I didn't isolate myself enough. Imagine if I had been in monk mode for 50% more of the time. Imagine what I would have done, what I would have produced, what kind of foundation I would have had. The rest of my life would have been a lot easier. And people think that isolation is so bad, like that woman. Nothing's really changed in all of this time. In 25 to 30 years, nothing's changed. People still think that being isolated is some sort of mental deficiency or it shows you're lacking. No. A lot of that comes from, as I've mentioned in other videos, a lot of that comes from mainstream media telling us that the loner is somebody who's depressed and should be feared, is a weirdo, whatever. You get stuff done when you're alone. Renaissance artists who produced all of these wonderful things that we enjoy 500 years later, a lot of times these weren't group projects. These were people toiling away alone, making great things. You can say the same about writing, about a lot of things creative. You need your solitude and you need to just go for it. It's not a bad thing, especially if you're young. There is no such thing as you're too young to be so isolated. That's wrong. Be as isolated as you want. In fact, it's the preferred state these days, I think. And that's the whole point of this channel. I always conclude these shows with a simple phrase, and I'll say it again here. Be happy alone. You can be happy alone. Do not fear isolation, especially if you are young. And don't pay mind to people who tell you that being isolated is a bad thing, because it isn't. And that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.